We are live? Okay. Hello, I
Yes.
warmly welcome you to our 81st webinar by the Academy of Space Renaissance International. And today I'm calling or broadcasting from a very special place. I'm broadcasting from a habitat on the moon. But actually, we are not on the moon, but it's a space habitat for analog astronaut training from EMPOL. EMPOL stands for Poland and
Your moon mass. Mhm.
Euromoon Mars, Poland. Genau. And yeah, my name is Sabine Heinz. I'm one of the vice presidents of Space Renaissance International. And our special guest today is Dr. Juliana Rinaldi-Semione. Hello, Juliana.
Hello.
It's nice to have you here, and you have it's a premiere. And I also would like to introduce our crew first. Bernard, I hope you agree with this. Uh, our crew is the first feminine mission from EMPL, and I would like to start with Niharika Bayredi. She's our commander, and she will introduce herself. Niharika, maybe you unmute yourself and talk about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Niharika. I am the commander of MPL 21, Expedition 96. So I'm in charge of, maintaining our crew, making sure everyone's running on schedule, as well as doing a couple experiments of my own here. I'm currently situated in the HAB lab, as you can see, and I've got some experiments set up. I haven't run them yet, but I will be developing a spirulina bioreactor to cultivate spirulina for oxygen production and um, food on missions like this.
Thank you, Niharika. And
Excellent.
she also will become an
Fun.
astronaut. A real astronaut, not only analog. And as well, we have our communication officer. It's Pauline Roblin. She is from France. Sorry, Niharika is from the United States. And Pauline is from France, as we are an international team. Pauline, maybe you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Pauline. I'm an engineering student and I'm specialized in cognitics. So they are combining cognitive sciences with computer sciences and especially with a focus on human factors. So during this mission, I'm the communication officer. So I I ensure that we have an effective communication between the crew and the mission control. And during this mission, I will analyze the interaction between the crew during briefings and lunchtime to compare formal with informal moments. And I also worked on time perception and more precisely retrospective perception of time during this mission to see if there is an evolution with the isolated environments.
Thank you, Pauline. And I also would like to introduce Dr. Celia Avila Rauch. She is our psychologist, or is as a psychologist here on board, and she is our medical officer. Celia, maybe you want to talk about your project and your work here on our space habitat.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here. I'm the psychologist, more or less, and we are trying with Pauline, work a little bit in human factors, and also in the art. What is the art and the psychology? What is the effect, our artistic passion for everyone, but also is looking for several questionnaires. What about confinement? What about the teamwork? What about the dynamic? What means to be outside? What means to be in a different place with different people do you know? And I try also to be compassionate to everyone and looking what happens. And yeah, I'm thinking also we are analyzing what is behavior, what is cognitive, what is emotional, what happens with us when we are staying every day 24 hours in our habitat. But I'm happy.
Thank you, Celia. Celia is our motivator here. And I'm Sabine Heinz. I'm an artist. I'm here as an artist and the data officer. Um, Actually, more artist than data. Um, but we did really nice work. I wanted to examine how art and creativity, how important it is in isolation and in space. And I think the crew is enjoying us. If you turn around, everyone, then we can show our space work, what we did.
Wow, okay.
And this work close in the dark. So we have a really nice, yeah, and we did other glow in the dark paintings. And yeah, I think it is a nice project. And I also would like to welcome Bernard Foying, and he's very close involved in MPOL, and he made it possible for me to join this mission. Thank you again. And thank you to Agatha because she is doing a lot of work and for us. So I'm grateful that MPOL make it possible to do these missions. And I have now an idea how hard the training for an astronaut is. So I rather become a space tourist, so I could. um, yeah,
Yeah.
and I would like to welcome Bernard Foying.
Yeah.
Professor Bernard Foying is our president.
Okay.
Yes.
So on behalf of the Space Renaissance International, welcome to all our astronauts in MPOL campaign, but also all our citizen astronauts from the world, as this is one of our goals, that everybody of us could experience being an astronaut from Spaceship Earth and also beyond. And today we were with Adriano and Werner at the United Nations COPIOS, Committee for Peaceful Use of Outer Space, where we met many delegations, different countries, international organizations, and we even presented some of our Space Renaissance international activities, our gallery also. As you know, we are going to launch a Space Renaissance for All gallery. This is the spare for it. And this includes a mixture of astrobiology, science sample of rocks, of soil from Earth, meteorite, but also some logo of some partners of our space SDG 18 initiative that was really launched by Space Renaissance and the leadership of Adriano. And so we are very pleased to have you on the moon. I think you have to think in your mind, you are on the moon. Huh? We isolate you and learn everything like you would be on the moon, so that we can inform how we prepare the next astronaut to go live and work there. And so I'm very pleased to have such a great crew on board. We have got some 20 crew as part of MPOD. We got also 20 crew as part of the simulation we are running in Hawaii. And so we are looking forward to research, but also all the human factors and some stories you can tell from living and working on the moon in this very extreme, but it looks very joyful conditions. And so thanks also to our speaker today, Juliana, that is put in this environment to give her talk. So all the best from Vienna. Oh, and of course, we have prepared also a little music for you. This is Fly Me to the Moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. He knows the road. Take my hand. He knows the road. Baby, kiss me. Voila. And so, as you know, we have space and art as part of our Space Renaissance chapter. And this is led by Sabina. We have also music. Adriano, our founder, is also a great musician. So we hope when you come back from the moon, then we can gather together in one event or in our Space Congress. We will share all this science, technology,
I would like
human factors, and art. Thank you.
I would like to be with you in the next analog team in order to play for you.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe. Why not?
Bring your guitar.
Well, okay. I apologize with Juliana because we are taking time before her lecture. However, I'm very happy that we have all of this beautiful team working in the analog moon mission. And I just want to say that this morning we listened to a very dramatic statement by Arti Olamaini, the director of UNOSA, who talk about the reduction, the budget, the UN budget cut that are limiting very much all the activities in the UN, including UNOSA and COPUOS. So I am afraid that we are standing in face of a struggle time where we have to defend the space, let me say, the space community and the space activity in the UN and outside UN. And yeah, this is where we are going in this incredible, strange age. However, okay.
Actually, I talked to Arti, the director of UNOSA, and I mentioned that we would be willing to help and to sponsor some young professionals to work with UNOSA on various projects. And she was very receptive, and she put me in contact with Dr. Andrew, and we are going to create some grant for young professionals that could do some work both with space renaissance and with UNOSA. Could involve astronauts, could involve other activities.
SRI will not be a spectator in this story. We want to be characters and then to help as we can. So I am also inviting who is not a member of SRI today to join SRI as a member. Okay. Thank you very much. Sabine, please give them the link for joining.
I give them the link, and I'm talking about. I wanted to show only here the former missions. Our mission is here on the this abbey. You can see the Pauline as a logo, but you see all the other missions who has taken place. So it's a lot of work what we did already. And yeah, I'm really
let's
thankful.
go, Sabine. Let's go ahead.
Yes, and Adriano is presented. So now I would like to introduce our speaker, and I apologize, but it was really a special, unique opportunity. Actually, I wasn't sure if I could join, so now we did it this way. Yeah, I would like to introduce you to our audience, and then I give you the floor here. Okay, Dr. Juliana Rinaldi-Semione will talk about space as a physical location for sustainable development. And she is the research fellow in future birds and freedom and the SDGs in space project lead in the faculties of engineering and social sciences at the University of Nottingham. Juliana's research interest centers on applied space ethics within a sustainable development framework, including future directions for cross-sector initiatives in aerospace production and for governance and social structures around upward colonization. She is passionate about synthesizing disparate bodies of knowledge to create and implement solutions to complex problems on Earth and on new worlds. With many years of implementing research in real life, Juliana has designed impact pathways involving government, policy, and industry stakeholders. Previous projects have examined human rights in the transition to clean energy, developing a sustainability requirement for an electromechanical engineering apprenticeship course, and establishing how mass can act as proof of concept for the global ethics and human values of ostensibly hold. Juliana has previously worked with global non-governmental organizations and in the public sector, specializing in managing cross-sector, multi-agency collaborative work. She is an alumna of the Space Generation Advisory Council, originally from California, USA. Juliana holds a Master of an MA from King's College London and a PhD from the University of Nottingham. Juliana, the floor is yours. You may share your screen, and I'm really grateful for your patience. And yeah, you may share your screen.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. There's absolutely no need to apologize. This is already one of the more fun groups of people that I've spoken to. I can tell you right now, we've played music, we've gone to the moon, wine's been offered up on the table as an optional drink. So I'd say this is off to a good start. I am going to share my screen. I think I have troubleshooted the full screen problem we're having, but you'll have to let me know if it works once I start sharing it. Okay, is this now your full screen view?
Yes.
Okay, great. Close your eyes because it opened up on not the first slide. I'm just going to go backwards. There we go. All right, so I won't spend very much time talking about myself because I've just given such a thorough introduction. What I will focus on just briefly is highlighting the fact that my career since 2012 has really focused on sustainable development at the intersection of practice and research. So you might have heard some really sort of diverse sounding bits from my background in that biography, but the through line for all of it has been it's not just theoretical to have sustainable development or theoretical to have a political viewpoint. These things can actually be put into action here on Earth. And as we're going to come to, they can be put into action in space as well. So my professional focus is really around getting people and bodies of literature talking to each other that don't normally talk to each other. And out of that, really trying to push not necessarily for more theory, unless we really need it, but to push for how to make that theory or that philosophy come out in real life and actualize on the ground. So that's sort of that's my passion in my work, and that's what I've chased, and that's how I end up now in a role that's half in the Faculty of Social Sciences and half in the Faculty of Engineering. To me, that's thrilling. The university created that role, but also has no idea what to do with a person who sits across those different disciplines. So it can be a very interesting bureaucratic situation at work sometimes. Anyways, let's get started. I want to start by describing a little bit about what sustainable development is. So I know that within the space renaissance community, some of you will be so deeply aware of what sustainability is, of what sustainable development means. I don't know how aware you'll feel about the different bits that I'm going to focus on. So I'm just going to try and level the playing field with a bit of an overview of the most important parts that are going to be the foundation for what we talk about this evening. So sustainable development, what is it? Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I am just going to minimize this bar here. Okay, so this is really important because sustainable development is all about allowing us to do what we need to do, allowing the people and entities and governments that are around today to do what they need to do to meet their needs, but with an eye toward the fact that they can't just figure out, how do we keep doing this kind of business for the next 70 years? They need to think about how do we keep the option open for future generations to carry this on or to change it, depending on what their needs are. So this kind of philosophy is most commonly applied to things like the environment or, let's say water conservation. So meet your own water needs, your own industry needs within reason, but let's make sure that we're conserving water and doing this in a sustainable way so that future generations don't have sort of man-made drought enforced or imposed upon them. Okay, that's an example of how this plays out. So sustainability often gets viewed as a blue or green issue. So green being sort of representative of environmental issues or planetary protection, but blue being representative of sort of the marine life and the ocean and conservation on water and underwater. So I am here to try and help us all in the space community to flesh out our conception of sustainability, because sustainable development is actually based on a three-part core, which is economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. So all of this, whenever we talk about the needs of the present and protecting the ability for future generations to meet their needs, sustainable development has always had these three sort of underpinning or undergirding pillars, if you will. It's not about one or the other. It's not about prioritizing two instead of the first one. Like there isn't an order to them. They all feed into one another and they're all interconnected. So I'm gonna move on from here, but I would like you to kind of remember this three-part foundation as we go forward, because it's not only integral to the definition that we currently have when we talk about sustainable development internationally, but it's really important to how we think about it in space as well. So we'll hold on to those three elements. So I want to talk about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That's a UN agenda, which has been signed, agreed to by all UN member states. And it talks about how we're going to create a groundwork for sustainable development in places where there isn't currently one, or in places where actually things are quite unsustainable. How will we reverse that? So this is from the preamble, and I've highlighted just a few items that are really important, again, to sort of the work that I'm building out and that I'm going to be discussing with you. So here's this quote: "We are determined to take bold, transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable, resilient path." And the global goals, which we'll talk about soon, the global goals seek to realize the human rights of all, are integrated and indivisible, and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development. So again, those three dimensions are economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. And I've kind of highlighted here in blue, or I've colored in blue, the bits that are really, really kind of motivating to me and that I've tried to root my work in, and you'll see how that plays out a bit as we go forward. At least I hope you'll see how that works out. Okay, here are the global goals that we just referred to. These are also known as the Sustainable Development Goals. Those two names are interchangeable, but these were published in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So these goals are actually the cornerstone of that document, and they are a guide map for how to establish sustainable development on Earth in all three of those areas. So some of these, I'm sure that you'll be familiar with at least one of these. Like everyone who I've encountered in the space sector has at least got a link to their work, usually to one of these, even if they don't explicitly frame it that way. It's fairly easy to think about, oh, our work contributes toward climate action, whether that's the use of space data or activities of space industry on the ground. Affordable and clean energy, that's another goal. And that is also something that the space sector participates in, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not, but it's sort of advancements in the space sector that enable some of this stuff pretty naturally. There's a huge, a very heavy usage of space data for a lot of these goals. So even non-space entities will use space data for protecting life on land, for understanding environmental challenges or threats. That's under the climate action bit. There's even ways that we use space data to track industry and to track infrastructure, whether it's of, our own country or another country that our government has an interest in. Whatever country you're in, I assure you that it happens both ways. So this is just sort of an overview. I don't expect you to memorize all of these, but we are going to come back to a few of them by way of example. So these goals, they weren't just sort of dreamed up for the purpose of the 2030 Agenda. They actually come from a long UN-driven history. And that history started in approximately 1987 when something called the Brundtland Report was published. And that report established, it gave us the vocabulary we have today, the vocabulary around those three core pillars, as well as around the definition of sustainable development and future generations that I've just been sharing about. That report itself draws on a long history of human rights, not necessarily sustainability in the blue or green sense as we most often envision it today, but that 1987 sort of stake in the ground as a publication is rooted in hundreds of years, some might even say millennia of considerations around what human rights are. And over history, those have been called different things. They've been referred to as natural rights, for a long time had a relationship to sort of a very Catholicized natural law perspective, and speaking globally at this point. And it kind of shifted into the language of development and then sustainable development, and it's shaped into what we've got today. So what we have today is what I'll call our modern understanding of sustainable development that starts kind of in the 80s, but it's a long history of consideration and intentionality. For a long time, that was done by philosophers, and then governments joined in. The UN, being a very modern organization, really started to think about that when it was the League of Nations, previous to morphing into the United Nations. And then, as I said, the United Nations itself has been sort of leading our global understanding of this. So that's a little bit of the background. And so I just heard the doorbell, and I realized it was the Zoom doorbell. I don't have to worry about my own door. So the last thing I'll say about this before moving on is that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development it's a universal agenda. And that's how it refers to itself. That is sort of by definition what it is, because the UN member states have universally agreed to it and agreed to do their part to uphold it and realize or advance these 17 goals. So I also kind of want to establish that the SDGs here, they're not a random starting point for when we look at space. We don't need to reinvent the wheel if we look at space and sustainable development, because we've actually got a pretty robust wheel, metaphorically speaking. So that's why we're going to be, you'll see me developing out my vision for space as a physical location for SDGs, as they are. Okay. A little bit of background on how the SDGs work. The SDGs have targets under each of them. So I'm not sure how familiar you'll be with different targets, but if your work aligns to a specific SDG, and that's an intentional part of research you've undertaken or the role that you have, then you'll be very familiar with it. As an example, I've just taken a screenshot here of SDG 12. SDG 12 is about responsible consumption and production. It wasn't a random screenshot because SDG 12 is going to be relevant to space as we look at space resource utilization and as we look at how we consume things in service to space and how we consume things once we're in space. So this wasn't completely random, but this is the current iteration focused on Earth. So what happens is that target 12.1 is essentially a sub-goal about how to realize responsible consumption and production. So in this case, implement the 10-year framework for programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns. That's the document. So implement that. All countries should be taking action, with developed countries taking the lead, taking into account the development and capabilities of developing countries. So that's very wordy. We don't really need to go into it, but I want to highlight just this is how the SDGs are structured. There's those big goals represented in the colorful boxes, and then they have multiple targets. They also have indicators, which are not crucial to the work that I'm going to be presenting tonight, but I just wanted to sort of do justice by the structure by explaining that there are indicators about how an organization or a government would measure progress against any of these targets. I'll I'll just leave it there just so that you kind of know what the roadmap is, so to speak, and how the SDGs look when you go online and expand them. Okay, so the preamble that I had read to you said that the goals, the global goals, are integrated and indivisible. I'm also going to highlight here, I've been using the acronym SDG without explaining. That's just short for Sustainable Development Goals. So integrated and indivisible from one another. This is a dizzying web demonstrating how interconnected the SDGs are. And this is by design, that they are interconnected. This web is drawn up by an organization that focuses on education. So they've put a little bright red node in the middle of their web to show kind of the central point of where their focused SDG meets up with multiple others. But you could color any node, whatever color is relevant to you. The key thing here that they point out, and NORAG is their acronym, they had an event in which they explained sort of how quality education is both dependent upon and supportive of many, many other SDGs. You can zoom out far enough conceptually to imagine how quality education is connected to responsible production and consumption, for example. So is a university consuming goods? Let's just talk about consumables right now, like paper cups and cutlery. Are they consuming those things in a responsible way? Are they consuming sort of those really basic daily things in a way that's sustainable? If they're dishwashing, right? If their cafes and their cafeterias use silverware, are they dishwashing in a sustainable way? These are minutia on from one perspective of how to look at it, but they're really kind of important and critical at understanding how interconnected these things are. Water conservation. So SDG 6 is around clean water, access to water, the existence of water in all of the places that it needs to be protected because it's scarce. Water consumption is a part of that, right? So I'm not going to delve too deeply into this web. I just wanted to kind of give this as an illustration to show that if you start tugging on one thread of this web, a lot of other threads of it bounce around. So that would be a really cool animation, but this is just a graphic. You'll have to use your imagination. So this is going to be true in space as much as it's true on Earth. And we'll talk a little bit about how these goals need to be expanded or adapted a little bit to meet our space needs and to allow the space sector to actually be a leader in demonstrating how sustainable development can be realized. But they stand as a really well, they are indivisible. That is an excellent word for it, straight out of the preamble. You really can't remove one of these without affecting others. And there will be some targets within any given SDG that you might think, hey, this or that target, we could scrap that and nobody would notice. And you might be right on a local level, or you might be right on a global level, depending on what target that is. But the reality is that all the targets were created to support these 17 goals. And you could probably list infinite numbers of targets, of sub goals for how to reach these 17. The point is that we need to be advancing the 17. So you'll see that I'm going to be proposing some new sub goals, as it were, some new targets. Okay, a little bit more on framing sustainable development and how I talk about it in my work. So this graphic is from colleagues of mine from a 2020 publication about resilient communities. They were working specifically on Sustainable Development Goal 8, which is about economic growth and fair work, decent work for everybody in the world. And 8.7, target 8.7, is around ending slavery and forced labor. So their academic paper was very specific, looking at 8.7. And if you were to read it, you would find, all of their examples are around modern slavery and labor abuses. But this graphic is more broadly about SDG number 8. So that main goal of economic growth and decent work. I'm going to come back to this graphic with a little bit of a focus on space later, but I wanted to introduce it now to show that my colleagues have really broken down how an SDG hits at multiple levels. So officially speaking, SDGs are sort of the buck stops with governments, to use an American expression. Governments are ultimately responsible, countries are ultimately responsible for the activity around SDGs and advancing those on the global stage. But everybody can and is expected to participate in advancing those goals. And this is how it looks for SDG 8. At the personal level, which is sort of that innermost circle, some examples are around consumer habits. So on a personal level, are we buying things that maybe have a fair trade flag on them or a kite stamp? Are we buying things that we actually know have brands that have been featured in the news for labor abuses? Are we looking the other way when we do those things? So just sort of that questioning of what kind of micro responsibility can an individual have? It also includes things like awareness in that personal circle. Being aware of what SDG 8 is. You don't have to go around using policy language like SDG 8, but kind of being aware of, if your workplace, if you have unions in your workplace, as we have very active unions at the university, how does that tie in? It's more than just historic union activity. It really ties into an awareness of how fair wages apply, about how sustainable living applies, how holding employers responsible works out at the personal level in your decision to either participate in strikes or not, or to vote a certain way. Thinking about it, asking an individual to think about this, not only in terms of what's in their personal interest right now, but in terms of what's in the interest of the people who will be in your role in the future when you retire or move on, in the interest of the university workforce at large, to use my own context. So we're asking people to really think about that sustainability factor. How do you meet your own needs with a vote within your union, for example, as well as keeping an eye toward the needs of future generations? Okay, zooming out to the next circle, they've talked about culture and locality as one of the sort of, I'll just say, I guess, sectors of thinking of like a map, so like a sector of where sustainable development plays out. Cultural and locality is at the community level, but it's also at sort of the subculture level. Subculture would have been a better label for this based on what they're talking about. So for example, civic leadership, that is locally elected people, locally elected individuals, or locally appointed individuals, or leaders within faith communities, people who are either official or de facto leaders in the community taking action towards sustainability and platforming that, not just sort of privately doing that and adding it to their CV, but actually platforming and making a point of saying, I've made this policy change or that recommendation, and this is why, for a sustainable purpose. And we are driving the community to think more broadly than ourselves and more futuristically than just the now. Legal and regulatory, that's a level that individuals don't have a huge role in. In democratic societies, they can vote on many of these legal and regulatory aspects, but not all of them. For example, there's not a lot that even in democratic societies, people can vote on regarding citizenship. That's something that really sits at a higher legal and regulatory level. But things around, for example, procurement is something that actually a broad section of the general public has a participation in, because they might be working in procurement specifically in their role. They might have a procurement job, whether that's at a public institution or not. They are participants in whatever national and international regulations exist. Okay, just by default, you are bound by the laws that are relevant to your activities. But it's around making sure that people understand actually these regulations don't exist to make their work life completely miserable and fill it with paperwork. That might be the effect of it. So they could be improved upon in many cases. But these things are existing increasingly at the national level because sustainable development is a universal global agenda, and we're moving toward fair work in the example of SDG 8. Finally, the structural, I'll just keep this really short. This is that sort of deep underlying stuff that everything else somewhat depends on. You know, the person at an individual level actually has quite a lot of freedom within the structural side of things in especially in democratic societies. But the structural level is also something that is a very slow ship to turn. So the SDGs, all 17 of them, are excellent examples of how slow a ship the structural work is to turn. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is not the first Sustainable Development Agenda. The Millennium Goals came before it. And progress was made, but they weren't completely met. And the SDGs are on track for some progress, but not as much as we would have hoped as a global community. And this is okay because there's going to be another global agenda, another universal agenda. But it's that sort of moving in the right direction, even if ever so slowly, that layer is about. So this is sort of, I want to sort of prime us for thinking about this image at the community level or at the settlement level when it comes to space. So in the second half of the presentation, we're going to be talking about settlements on the moon, on Mars, in orbit. And so I guess I just want to start sort of priming you to think about this and hopefully getting you excited to think about this in terms of, okay, what do these levels look like in a space colony? Okay, I'm going to pause here for questions on sustainable development itself. So anything we've talked about so far, I'm happy to take any questions. I can't necessarily see the chat. It looks like there are no questions in there, but let me see if I can. I feel like if I show all of the participants to myself, it's gonna change. Yeah, I can't very well click on the screen without it changing things. So.
Okay. Yes. So.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. And can you stop sharing the screen, please, so we can see everyone here on the chat? Thank you.
Yes, I've paused it. Yeah.
I thank you so much, and I think my students have some questions.
Very good.
Yeah, you know, we have our program we are eating now, but maybe Bernard, you want to start with some questions?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I could start because yes, thanks for this analysis, which is I think gives also some logics and some structure in the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's true. I think that the virtue of the 17 SDG is that they have been approved and by a large community. But that's true. Sometimes we don't understand what is the logic and why they have been numbered this way. Why do you give something which would allow to understand better? What I see also is one aspect is peace. I don't see it there in your analysis. So that's also something that we should really incorporate in a civilized society. And also, what would be nice also to see is how space, at the moment, is not identified as a SDG, but deserve to be placed also as a visible, target SDG, so that it can be shared with the public all over the world as well, to make people more aware how space can, in fact, deliver benefit to society. So one question is, okay, how do you handle war and peace? And the second, how would you put space as a goal in your logic as you presented?
Thank you for those questions. I'll just say that actually peace is mentioned. It's part of SDG number 16, peace and just institutions.
Yeah. But in your analysis, I didn't see it. So I wonder what happened to peace.
Yeah, it's in there, I promise. It's an important one. So in terms of space, though, so I know that the Space Renaissance community has done so much work and so much advocacy around an 18th SDG for space. And I was at the COP-US meeting where that was kind of officially platformed in the moment that SRI had the chance to speak. And Al was there at the time. But for me, I think that we've only got 5 years left on the 2030 agenda. I think that, well, I know that there are other instances globally where people have added an unofficial 18th SDG for their own purposes. So a sector might say, we know it's not official, but we're going to adopt an 18th SDG. The space sector could do that, for example. My observation from working in this area in the space sector has been that the space sector is a difficult sort of nut to crack, so to speak, because they really feel committed. Many actors in the space sector really feel committed to sustainability, but they don't understand that very many of the sustainable development goals depend on them. But the rest of the world understands and uses space data and relies on space developments all the time. But the space sector itself, whenever you're at a COPUS meeting or you kind of read an update from someone, they like to talk about how other people are using space and how that's an example of space supporting sustainable development. I would say that that might be why there hasn't been as much uptake as we might have hoped for around the 18th SDG. Is I think a lot of space actors, they're not convinced yet that space has its own role to play and needs to be viewed sustainably. I think they just think, well, everybody uses it, so we kind of get off easy in the space sector. But I will make some proposals in the second half of this around how we treat sustainability in space, and I'll hopefully answer your question more thoroughly there.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to add something too. I think the problem is that in a zero-sum game, harmonization is not possible. I mean, if the quantity of resources is fixed, you cannot, but the number of individuals is growing. When you try to harmonize consumption and production in a finite quantity of resources, of course, the quantity available for each individual will decrease. This problem will automatically generate conflicts. And it is this thread that has brought to the current situation where many people don't accept to reduce their consumption. So they are available to fight in a fraternal struggle, brothers against brothers. But if we add space expansion expansion to space, the game is anymore as is place and resources for trillions of people to develop. So this is in very few words the concept that brought us to talk about an 18 SDG. And you were talking about the SDG 8, and I think SDG 8 is very important because it
we have here some
of the 3 SDGs that we consider fundamental. We say that 7, 8, and 9 doesn't work in economic growth of the other SDG. But in order the 3 SDGs can really work, they need an 18 SDG that is space development, civilian space development, that can really assure the sustainability of these 3 SDGs. Because without space development, these 3 immediately conflicts with the environmental goals. So they cannot work. And as soon as you restart growing industrial development, immediately you restart, and we never stopped polluting, but you restart polluting, you restart consuming too much, you restart depleting the oceans and everything. and limit the other spaces space in so
I don't
that's why we think that we SRI, we think that it's not a dream. This is the only way. If we don't go on that way, we have a civilization implosion, because the crazy psychotic people will govern, and they are already doing that, and lead us to kill each other. That is because they think that people think that reducing our number, everyone will begin to better, but it's not so, because an implosion of the civilization will bring to even worse situations because of the cultural decay that will follow that. So, okay, I don't want to make a but just to tell you my my points. That is, of course, to work for an harmonization is a very worth work. I'm afraid it will be useless without a strategy, a current strategy. Then maybe this is the argument of your second part of your presentation. So, okay.
Thank
we
you
have
so
a
much.
docking here. Sorry that there's some movement in the background. Some docking has started in our habitat. So yeah, but please answer your question. In case that I have to leave, I have to apologize, and please, Bernard, take over then. But I think at the moment everything is fine.
Also, if there are some questions from the moon, from the astronaut, I think that we welcome them. I think that there is a better connection with the moon, actually, than with Vienna. We lost a bit of the message from the...
Yes,
yes. Let's cut it short. And let's have an answer from Juliana, and then let's have a short question from the moon. Yes.
Thank you. Yes,
and we are running this thing from Vienna, from the UN. This is symbolic some way. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say we should probably take maybe one more question and then carry on. Just in brief response to Adriano, I think a lot of what I am building out in the second half will probably address some of what you've said, but you are absolutely right in that we've got sort of this inbuilt conflict. And I liked how you phrased it, brothers against brothers, because that is essentially what's happening. And we may not always see it that way. You know, the parties that are involved in those sort of resource conflicts or zero-sum games may not see themselves as brothers to brothers, but they are. You know, people, if you look at humanity as a whole and as a civilization, you may have countries either literally or figuratively warring against one another for resources or space, or not space, but space on Earth. They'd be warring over things. And yet, when you look at humanity as a civilization as a whole, as the SDG sort of the spirit of sustainable development would have us do, you really do have this sort of infighting. Okay, next question, and then I'll do the next part of the presentation since I keep teasing that out.
Okay. From the moon.
I have a question because I'm more focused on human factors. So I would like to come back on the different level you mentioned about how we can hack to sustainable behaviors. And I would like to ask you if you think there is a level we have to prioritize to act if we want efficient changement in behaviors in the population.
Great question. So I just want to make sure that I understand. So you're asking how we arrive at sustainable behaviors and if there's something that we have to prioritize to get there. Is that right?
Level we can act because maybe just in personal level, it will not be sufficient to have results. So if do you think there is a level we need to prioritize to expect some changes?
Yes. So I'll answer the second part first. I think that the level that needs to be prioritized by those of us who aren't actually government actors, is that level of it'll come back on the screen during the second half, but the cultural and locality level. So it's that level above the personal, and that's where you start looking at community groups, and that could be, that could be very specific. It could be a space nonprofit, for example. A space non-governmental organization is a community, even if they're not based, even if its members are not based in the exact same city. So that's a community, and that community, such as SRI, can be making decisions and advocating and normalizing certain viewpoints and behaviors. And that means starting new behaviors, and it may also mean changing or stopping existing behaviors. But I think it's that level of community and locality where we need to focus, because that's where the everyman, like average Joe, that stereotypical character, um, that's where he gets buy-in. That's where he decides that he's going to be like the other people in his community or not. But that's where he really gets an understanding of how these values or these changes would impact life, both his life and life around him. So, yeah, broadly speaking, I would say we need to focus on that level. And I think that we actually can move towards sustainable behavior. It's absolutely not going to be an overnight phenomenon. Um, it's also not going to be perfect. So even those of us who, work work very, like my colleagues, they work very specifically on one SDG. They don't do everything perfectly. They don't understand if there was forced labor in the creation of a laptop that they've been issued by the university, like, nor can they, and arguably they shouldn't have to. So you can't have sort of perfect behavior, but you can have aware behavior, and you could have purposeful behavior. And I think that's what I would consider the very first draft of sustainable behaviors. Okay.
Sorry, I apologize because I mute everyone that is not talking because the connection is low, is poor. And if we mute when we don't talk, is better for the band.
The main problem is that we are in one habitat, and we had our computers on, and we were very close together. It's actually one room who is divided in some sectors. So it was a special webinar, and I think it was.
I wanted to say something. For this reason, I was unmuted.
Okay, please go. Go ahead.
Also, for me, the question is about the behavior. If you know the goal, if you know the purpose exactly, because we are talking about theory, and some people get very quickly frustrated. It's independent of the personality or whatever. But I think the point sometimes is people try, people is very engaged, but the result is frustrating. And I think if we can see the sustainability, not as very quickly what you say, not as developing, is people need to be educated, but for the education, you need also the purpose, and also the people is also sustainable, is also giving us this sense, no? I think when we are in the space, you need to be together, you need to work together, because otherwise it's not possible. And maybe in a space it's possible to be more sustainable in this sense, because it's a teamwork, and this teamwork is going to be stronger. But for us, I think the question for us is not like this. The question for us is, no, the world is big and everyone has a priority. And I think when we can change this concept of priority, not my country, not my people, not my mountain or my sea, when we see, I think probably the conscious, what you say, not to be conscious, the consciousness. What do you think about? What do you think about it?
Amen. Yeah, I think that a lot of what you've said absolutely encapsulates sort of my own perspective, as well as sort of, if I may say, like the ideal sustainable development perspective. I think I'm so excited that you have provided the segue into the discussion for space, because actually it is kind of critical that we see ourselves as one when we operate in space. And I think going forward, that's part of what I'm advocating, is that as we actually launch people to stay long term in space, you know, in places that are going to be more permanent than the space station after it's decommissioned, we will really start to need to define what it means to act as one very differently than we do now. You know, it's kind of easy to say, oh, the astronauts on the space station, they represent humanity, they are one. And surely there are geopolitical differences. I am not here to minimize those. But it's easy to have that sort of contained philosophy when you've got 7 to 10 people. And they've all got their own agreement on how to operate together up there. But it's very different when you've got profit-driven companies sending hundreds of people to Mars at a time, or, you know, other profit-driven companies putting people in orbit for either tourism or for long-term hotel stays. So let me come to that. Celia, if I don't fully answer your question by the end, please be the first to speak up at the end of it. So I'm going to share my screen again. And now that we know it works, I feel a lot more confident about that. Here we go.
Tia, you are muted.
Sorry.
You wanted to say something, or?
No. I'm listening. I'm listening because I think it's very interesting, and I'm very, no, I think it's great. And
Also, I think it is a very important thema,
Right.
subject, and above our SDG, we have this initiatives, and I think we have to go on. And even if Adriano mentioned that the situation in the world is not in favor to this, because they have cut a lot of programs in the United States, I think we have to go on with this and fight for it. And I think there are many people who think like we, and space is a chance to do it better than here on Earth, and we have to fight for it. And yeah, because yeah, it's very important. So yeah. Dr. Rinaldi-Semione, I would like to thank you so very much to be with us today. I would love to thank you for your nice lecture, for your time, for being so patient with us, because we had a special situation here. So you were connected to space in some way. And yeah, thank you. And to our audience also, thank you for being here with us, for joining us. And
Sabina, we're not quite done yet, right?
We are not.
I think that she has still a second part of the talk to give, so we should be short on question and let her speak. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
I was hoping that I hadn't literally run half an hour longer than I thought I had.
Yeah.
so I thought I understood that you are in hurry, because it said you want to take one question more, and then it sounded like you wanted to leave. Okay, then.
No, I'm sorry. No, I wanted to make sure that we could finish out the space component.
Yeah.
Where the first half was about SDGs.
So let's go for space. Yes.
So Adriano and Bernard, go on.
Brilliant. Sorry for any miscommunication on my end. I wanted to set the scene and set the context for the really sort of what I consider the exciting, meaty part of this. So sustainable development in space. I think that sustainable development in space is a responsible way to view progress in space. I think it's not a pet project of mine. I have no pre-existing vested interest in sustainable development. You know, I didn't help to write the agenda or something like that. What I want is for us to deal in space responsibly as a society and as a race, a human race. And I think that the sustainable development agenda and that definition of sustainability regarding both our needs and future generations speaks to the ethos that space activity has purportedly been guided by since the Outer Space Treaty. Now, I'm not naive to the fact that the body of space treaties is not necessarily welcomed by all. It's not all the treaties are signed by even very many parties to begin with. But it has some guiding principles that have continued to come out in rhetoric, sometimes to the manipulation of others, but most of the time in good faith. I hear a lot of people and read a lot over history of people really appealing to common heritage in good faith, appealing to equal access in good faith. And nations who are just coming onto the scene as spacefaring nations, they want to appeal to that. They want to appeal to common heritage, and they want to appeal to sort of that the dream of space that some of us in spacefaring nations have become almost used to. They want to say it can be our dream too, and we should have that dream as robustly as people who have been living in spacefaring nations since the first rockets were launched into space. Since the first peaceful rockets were launched into space, I should clarify. So I think that in itself is a demonstration of future generations' appeal for their own piece of space. So if we view today's spacefaring nation as the future generations of the delegations who wrote the Outer Space Treaty and signed it, right? Today, we're actually viewing the future generation and the future spacefaring nation of the 1960s. And then who knows what the future generations going forward will look like. There'll be future generations who have never lived on Earth because we sent people to Mars and they had children on Mars and what have you. Okay, so why do I think we need to view space as a physical location for sustainable development? You've heard part of the answer, but I'm going to say it succinctly here. Sustainable development is about future generations as much as it is about the present. And we need to think of space as a physical location or environment for sustainable development because we plan to establish a near-term future and future presence in space. All right, so that intention of ours to establish a near-term human presence and future generations in space, by that action and by that intention, we have made sustainable development a space issue. So actually, in my ideal world, I wouldn't need to convince anybody that sustainable development is a space issue. And I know that space renaissance, you already think about sustainable development as a space issue. But if I think about going to the IAC, there are a lot of people that I need to convince about that. But actually, just our intentions as spacefaring humanity make this a space issue. So where's this going to matter? How do we really get some of the, I'm going to home in on some of the brass tacks around this in the next few slides. Where is it going to matter that we think about space as a physical location? It's going to matter anywhere we discover life, anywhere that we introduce life. It's going to matter in orbit when we put people up there and expect them to create sustained civilizations or colonies or what have you, environments, even if it's, as I said earlier, like a hotel example. It's going to matter on the moon very, very soon. In relative human history terms, it's going to matter on the moon extremely soon because we're going to have bases on the moon. We're going to be treating the moon as a location in its own right for industry and exploration, but also as a stepping stone to elsewhere in the solar system. Mars, this is all going to matter on Mars in a really big way. My first piece of research around SDGs in space looked at Mars, and that continues to be a piece of research that just keeps sort of uncovering more and more layers to it. Is wow, like no human has ever actually been on Mars. There are rover tracks, but there are no footprints on Mars. That's a new world in really the truest sense. So, wow, let me come to that again later. But this is going to matter in many, many parts of space. And space itself, I think we need to stop viewing it only as sort of the final frontier or as a vacuum. Space, because of our intentions, is going to become an extension of human environment, the environment that humans live on or inhabit. So here we go. Here's the reason. So translating the SDGs to space. I've kind of put a little progress rating here on my own activity around this. How do we make the SDGs relevant, not just in theory, but really sort of figure out what they mean for space and if they need to be adjusted at all? I also want to say we do only have 5 more years left on the Sustainable Development Agenda, but I'm going to acknowledge that again later when I say actually space already has a foothold in developing the next global agenda. We just need to reach for it. We just need to take it, and that's a practical outpouring actually of part of SRI's philosophy. There are opportunities. We just have to reach for them, and there's a really good one coming up later. So my actions around this, the green represents actions that I have taken and that I'm sharing with you today, and the orange represents actions that are still kind of ongoing and are not ready to be presented yet, but they're in the process. So comparing the Space 2030 agenda and the SDGs, the Space 2030 agenda is COP-US's sort of set of goals and intentions for how they're going to make space sustainable. In my view, it's very narrow, their conception of sustainability within that document. And so I've been engaging, have engaged and have continued to engage lots of different stakeholders around that and how to expand that view. I was hoping we could have expanded that in the midterm review this year of Space 2030, but I don't think it's going to, it didn't have a serious agenda item. The next one that I've undertaken and that you're going to be seeing the results of here is analyzing the SDGs and their targets to look for relevance to our space activity. The third action I've taken is give special attention to the policy-oriented SDGs. And I saw we may be using the words ever so slightly differently, but I think we're mostly on the same track, Adriano. I saw on that screen that you shared that you had sort of a policy label for a certain set of SDGs. So for me, what I mean by that is SDGs that are not as commonly spoken about within the space or science community. So not the green ones, not the environmental focused ones, not the water and ocean life focused ones, but the more people driven ones, or the ones that are most closely affiliated with what we might call the soft sciences or social sciences. And the orange action, which is ongoing, is to frame propositions for what to do about this within the logical end of our stated goals for inhabiting space. And as I said, the logical end of our goals is that we extend human habitation into space. It is a part of human environment, not just an idea. And we build new worlds. I could talk for an hour about how big a responsibility that is and how there is gravitas that the main actors in colonizing the moon and Mars do not understand. They do not comprehend the gravitas of their activities to build new worlds. They don't see it that way. They see it very narrowly. So I'll leave that there because we are at risk of me straying into a lot of commentary that is less focused on this presentation. Okay, so again, we're focusing even further down now, even more specific. When I was looking at the SDGs and their targets, I read all of them, kind of annotated them, developed out which ones are relevant to space. This is a sampling. This is just 3. So here are 3 of the SDGs. These are questions that I wrote based on targets. And so the first one is, what would sustainable recruitment for a health workforce in space look like? So that comes from SDG 3 around health and well-being. Target 3.C talks about a sustainable health workforce globally. What does that look like in space? You know, you can't have a model where you've only got 1 doctor in a colony. What if a doctor falls ill? What if someone requires attention that needs more than 2 hands? What if the robots in the operating room, what if they fail? Something goes wrong. I don't know. Even if it's a temporary failure, what if they fail at the wrong time? What does it mean to recruit a health workforce? Who's in the workforce? What training do they need? What training do they need before they go to live and work in space? What training can they get once they arrive there? What does continued professional development or licensing look like for people doing surgeries in space? Or, really thinking about that long distance Mars destination. Um, I want to get us away from the idea that, well, if it's only a moderate problem, someone could be flown back from the moon within a few days, we could take care of them. No, like Mars, let's put us out there and think about what the health workforce needs to look like. And if we're going to be landing on Mars within the next decade with even a handful of people, how do we start recruiting now? How do we start inspiring the next generation, as it were, to think about space as a location for practicing healthcare and medicine? Right? So this is sort of the really practical stuff that I think can come out of the existing SDGs. There are answers to these questions. I'm not the right one to answer them all because it needs to come from communities like the healthcare community and the other parts of the science community and space community. But these are questions that can be answered and can be actioned even within the next 5 years. They need to continue being actioned after that, but we can definitely get a quick start on them. So the other questions are similar. How will universal access to reproductive health and rights be coordinated? That's from a different SDG. Around, oh, someone's unmuted. I don't know if you can hear me any longer, but I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, excuse me a moment. I have to leave now because we have to follow a program here, and we have to take measurements. I wish you nice success, Bernard. I give you over the moderation.
Yes. Let's target to finish in 5 minutes, so that way, because we have to respect the protocol, and so yes, Juliana, if you could just wrap up, and then we have just some concluding question and statement. Thank you.
Okay.
And all the best to our astronauts who are in fact expert on this topic of living a healthy life and work on the moon. So also from this type of simulation, we can learn a lot about what will be a future community beyond Earth.
Okay.
See you then. Bye.
Thank you. Yes, we are nearing the last few slides, so we are on track.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
So this is a slide that I showed at the IAC in Milan last year. And I'm going to focus on the second question here. This came out of my analysis of the Space 2030 agenda and comparing it to the SDGs. One of the things I think is missing from the agenda, but that we really need to answer, which UN entities need to be invited to speak into this concept of space as a physical location for sustainable development? I talked about this with some of the UNUSA staff, and we really have been continuing to brainstorm out, okay, if we're going to talk about human rights in space, that can't just sit with COPUOS, right? COPUOS doesn't have the expertise in human rights. It doesn't hold the bodies of treaties or an awareness of global law around human rights. That sits somewhere else. But looking at the fact that all those SDGs are so knitted together in that web, who needs to be invited to talk about this? Who needs to be invited to speak into whatever the next agenda is and how COPUOS plans to implement it? They've got the Space 2030 agenda. What will the next thing be? What will the document be that they create for themselves? And who needs to feed into it? Who needs to say, this is that other bit of missing knowledge that the space sector needs, because now we're going to be living in space, living and working in space long term. But obviously the space sector doesn't have that within itself. It, has never been meant to have that within itself. We've got to draw on things together. Okay, this is, what do we do? This is just really what I would leave you with in terms of what actions do we take as people. There are two pathways that I've delineated. The first is idea generation and guidance from within the SDGs. And I've shown you a little bit of an example of that there. So really kind of going to the source, that globally agreed upon source of what the goals are and what sustainability looks like. Always that three-part structure of economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. Go straight to the targets. There are ideas we can easily start teasing out in the here and now for long-term change, long-term sustainability. Pathway two is at that individual and that cultural and locality level, work within our spheres of influence. So change the way it's always going to be done. One of the things I hate the most is when someone says that we're doing something because that's the way it's always been done. When you're talking in the world of sustainability, most of the time, the way it's always been done needs to change or we can't be sustainable. So I've put here, change how it's always going to be done. Think about a couple generations from now in your sphere of influence. When someone says, oh, it's always been done this way, well, is it going to look like something good and sustainable that we have helped to create, or is it going to just look like this messy de facto thing that everybody has already inherited? Okay, so these are the two pathways here. And we can actually all do these things. Policymakers especially can be doing the first one, but we can all do a little bit of both of these. This is an example of what I've been working on. I told you it wasn't ready yet to present, so I didn't intend on giving you a full presentation of it, but I did want to show you a sample of the propositions that I'm making for how we translate these SDGs to space and how we add a little bit of nuance. There's a lot more to be added. Please don't look at this as the finished product. It's just sort of a preview into what I've been working on. I just wanted to share sort of, as I was asked to share my work, this is the current iteration of my work on SDG 5. That's the one that I've currently been trying to work out and putting into conversation and literature a little bit, hoping to publish some reflections on recent Mars literature and how it relates to SDGs like this one. You can come back to these slides later if you want to kind of see the bullet points under each target, but I've just been brainstorming some of the implications. Okay, I wanted to give a final example of where I said, let's act within our spheres of influence. I work at a University of Nottingham, and I have started to, this note to self should have been in the speaker notes. This was a novice mistake for me to put that up at the top. We have a design, make, and test module in 2 of our programs, which are featured here in the pictures. And these are within our Faculty of Engineering. The project that both of these courses make students go through is to design, make, and test a CubeSat. They don't have to necessarily be launch worthy, but they need to be functional at the Earthside testing. What we're doing is asking them to look at modern slavery statements and procurement practices for the suppliers that they buy their products from, that they buy their satellite components from. And what this does, I'm going to go back to this picture because we saw it earlier. What this does touches on a lot of SDGs, but let's zoom in on how it touches SDG 8. These engineering students, they don't normally think about decent work and economic growth. That's not what their degree is in, it's what their apprenticeship is in. But I've circled the components of SDG 8 that this touches. And so within my sphere of influence at a university, I've actually got some of the structural influence by working at an accredited, degree granting institution. And this has become part of the curriculum, part of the marking requirement. They cannot pass their courses if they don't include this consideration around procurement. So I've kind of had a structural influence there, even though it's within my sphere of influence, right, in that education segment. But more specifically, there's a lot of activity in that legal and regulatory that's been circled, as well as in the personal. We're developing those out for students. Okay, I will leave us with this final thought. Please always be socializing sustainable development. And what I mean by that is making it social. Make it a part of your social world, work at home, in the community. I don't mean a form of government when I say socializing. And advocate that we operate from the top down, that we have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach as well. We've got to be making changes at that structural level if we can, but we really, really have opportunities at the community, locality, and personal levels. Okay, any questions?
So thank you very much, Juliana. Yes, let's see if there are any questions.
Yes,
A short one.
A couple,
a short question.
a couple of final remarks, if you like.
A question, or do you have a question or only remarks? Let's give priority to question.
Just a remark. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Okay, so let's go for
very
short remarks.
happy. I'm very happy that you mentioned the Space 2030 agenda that was published in and adopted in 2021. That means 6 years after 2015, when the Space 2030 agenda was delivered. And if the Space 2030 agenda is understandable, that space was not very much considered at that time, because we were at the very beginning of the reusable rockets. So the importance of space was not yet understood, for sure not in the bureaucratic realm, let me say. But in 2021, the space revolution, the new revolution was well evident. So it is very much bad that the Space 2030 agenda is only half, in terms that the space settlement is not considered at all. We have a review of the Space 2030 agenda and adoption of a fifth overarching objective, that is civilian space development. But unfortunately, they don't want to amend the agenda, as you discovered. They don't want any amendment. They only want to ask agenda was implemented or not. So this is what we will discuss in the General Assembly of COPUS in next June, July. However, our document with our 39 amendments is available. I have put the link in the, it is online, it is a PDF in the chat here. So you can take it out that and see if you can agree on some concepts. Last, I think when we talk about space, we're talking only about planets. So honestly, we don't see Mars as a place where we can live. We like very much more the air model, the rotating infrastructures in open space, reproducing 1G gravity, and allocating inside all the environment, reconstructed Earth biome. So we think that it's very much more near to the human requirements for our living standards than the surface of a planet with 1/3 gravity respect to Earth, or 1/6 like the moon, where changes, because all of our elaboration starts from human requirements for what is best for human. This is okay. Okay, last thing, I understand that the University of Nottingham seems to be full of people available to talk about these things, that could be receptive about the spaceless philosophy and about the technologies and so on. So I already have made this kind of thing at the Strasbourg International Space University, where a couple of years ago I made a lecture on the space renaissance philosophy. So if you like, if you will invite me, I am ready to do the same at University of Nottingham. Maybe we can plant some seeds together over there.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent.
I will definitely flag that. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Time for action. I think that's very good, Adriano. Your remarks are a call for action. And I see it, yes, also another near-term action. Juliana, you mentioned, okay, the need to address also some of the lessons we could learn to prepare ourselves to habitat in space. You could join one of our astronaut simulation campaign. You know, that's a place where you live and you work. We also practice interdisciplinary mix, international mix. And if you have some students that would like to join some of these campaigns, so we have a program to co-fund their participation, and in a research environment where they document what they do, they propose experiments, and they publish. And so that will be something also we'd like to carry together with your university. Also, it's a great hands-on practice, which can be complementary to the deep thinking, and then help us to prepare some near-term actions. On the topic of space, it's true that if you look at the UN level, it took a lot of time, and even just the recent exercise of last year, Summit of the Future, barely mentioned space for the first time. And
One sentence.
Yes, in one sentence. Oh my God. And so there is a lot of work to do. Now we have to, it seems that COPIOS, we attend COPIOS, has not been so effective to influence the overall UN system. As you mentioned, there are many other bodies in the UN system. There is the UNIDIR, there is also other bodies, FAO, the Health Organization, but they are busy with their own issues and problems. And through that, we should find a way to be maybe more effective through the UN COPIOS, also to serve some of the general goal of UN, and us as a civil society, we have to help in this process. And so our proposal for Space SDG 18, we know encounter a lot of resistance from let's say the community, the classic community of COPIOS, but we have to see how we can talk to the public, how we can talk to the young generation, because they are the next generation, how we can talk eventually also to politicians so that they can get ownership of some of the ideas, not too extreme that you have, but at least those that make sense for them in a short time scale. And we don't want to oppose what is sustainability in direction to Earth, which there's a lot of effort, and also sustainability when we move beyond the Earth, which is something that we are carrying, but we want to have a balanced view on space for terrestrial application and space for going beyond. And also on the topic of resources, it's not really the material resources or the power, solar power, but some of the resources of human creativity and human entrepreneurship that we can foster with space, and that will benefit the whole world, even on Earth. So these are these aspects we think we could try to incorporate in the practical plan for action. So now, what could we do with Nottingham?
Well, we've actually got an Institute for Astronautical Technology that I'm a part of, but we've got a huge portion of us who are in space law or policy, or like myself working interdisciplinarily. So I was actually thinking there must be ways that we could be collaborating that would be really, really exciting to tease out, I think. Those of us working on space at the university, I like to think that we are small but mighty. There's a small number of us that are only focused on space as opposed to commercial aerospace. But we do a lot of activity for how many of us there are. And we've got many students who have space projects that I know would just love to hear about your opportunities in analog missions.
Okay, excellent. So we nominate you today our ambassador to Nottingham University from Space Renaissance. And also, if you could find some candidate for some of our activities, be there analog astronaut, but also we have in our Space Renaissance Academy various working groups, some on philosophy, some also on technical subject. We'd like to have a body of colleagues and students from Nottingham we could incorporate in Space Renaissance and then work on some pilot project together.
Brilliant. It would be really great to discuss that in more detail. We should have a brainstorming meeting.
Excellent. And so anybody else would like to make some concluding statement?
We are also developing.
Yeah.
We also developing the or for the second year developing data challenge. We made that thing in 2024. We will.
Okay, so I hope our audience got some of the words from Adriano. It seems that you are on Mars, Adriano. The connection is quite limited, but as a summary, we want really to thank you, Juliana, for the talk. We thank our astronauts from the moon. They had to go back to their protocol of activities. We thank all our audience worldwide, also online. And we want to remind you that you are welcome to join Space Renaissance International, which gives access to a community, also to some of our activities, and as well give access to some of the funding that we have for young professionals in the Young Explorers Medici funds. Also, we have co-funding for some of these analog astronaut fieldwork or internship that we have in along the goals: technical, scientific, legal, human, societal, that we have at Space Renaissance. So thank you very much, Juliana. And okay, we invite for the next webinar. Yeah, see you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Hello. I don't. Okay, let's stop then. My Zoom at this point. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for staying with us. Okay? It's very interesting and following this.